Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1 on Saturdays and Sundays. You'll also find Wichita Liberty TV at my site, that's the Voice for Liberty, on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. You'll find this episode of Wichita Liberty TV, all the old episodes, plus all the other content that I and others create on nearly a daily basis. So today, no special guest except co-host Karl Peterjohn, and we're going to, or at least I'm going to pry him for some insight into the big news this week, which was the Kansas Republican primary elections of August 2018. Now, Karl, there's one story that probably overshadows everything else. Let's put that aside for a moment and cover some things that were a little bit less suspenseful. But as a reminder, first of all, you can register to vote until October 17th. And the general election is on Tuesday, November 6th. There was a lot of confusion, Karl, that independents thought they couldn't vote, but they could have gone to the polling place on election day and said, I want to be Republican or Democrat. They would then their registration would be updated to reflect that they're in that party. And here, they have until October 17th to change the party back, but it really doesn't matter what party you're registered as at general election time.
That's true, but a big change from the past because, Bob, you used to be able to be a member of one party and go to the polls on primary day and say, I don't want to be, let's say, a Republican anymore. I want to vote in the Democrat primary, or vice versa.
So those are called open primaries.
Yeah, and that has been eliminated. But if you were unaffiliated going into the election, primary election, you could go in and say, hey, I'd like
so we have kind of a semi-open primary. I don't know anyway. But, okay, we nominated a Democrat to run for governor, and I guess the surprising news there, not that Senator Laura Kelly of Topeka won, but she won going away with 52% of the vote. I think a lot of observers thought that would be much closer between her and Josh Swatty.
I really didn't think it was going to be all that close. Former Governor Sebelius was strongly in Senator Kelly's camp, and the Democrat Party establishment was strongly supportive. And although Mr. Swatty did run well out in some of the rural parts of the state, there aren't many votes out there, and I think that's a reason that she was able to win. But I think she's going to have a big burden. The Sebelius-Obama legacy that she's going to have to carry into the general election, I don't think is going to sit well with a lot of Kansas voters, certainly not the Republicans, but I think also there's a lot of other folks out there who don't really want to go back to the Obama era policies.
And of note, Karl Brewer, our former mayor, placed second above Josh Swatty, and I was surprised at that. But,
well, I really wasn't.
Won't be advancing.
Karl Brewer, as Wichita's mayor, had a lot of name recognition in this part of the state. The other candidates, I think, had to really struggle to get their names here, and since there wasn't a lot of funding, Senator Kelly did have some TV advertising, but the other candidates in the Democrat side really didn't.
Well, amongst the Republicans, there were 5 candidates for Secretary of State. We saw all of them at the Pachyderm Club a couple weeks ago, and they were, I thought, a pretty impressive bunch. But it is Scott Schwab who got 38%, a pretty big lead over everybody else. So he'll be advancing to face Brian McClendon, the Democrat of Lawrence, Kansas. He is from Kansas. He graduated from KU, but he worked at Google for quite a while, and so that's a race that could be potentially close, I think, in November.
Well, it depends on how much money is brought into the races. Raising campaign funds in these races for administrative offices like Secretary of State or State Treasurer or Insurance Commissioner is very challenging. And if you've got a Silicon Valley Google exec who's coming back to Kansas,
he could have a lot or not. We don't know that.
But, money can play a role in politics, and this would not be unprecedented.
Yeah. For Commissioner of Insurance, there was a Republican primary between I think longtime Senator Vicky Schmidt of Topeka, and then Clark Schultz of, is he of Lindsborg? Somewhere up around there, who had been in the House of Representatives for a while, but for the last 3 years had been the Deputy Insurance Commissioner. And I was kind of surprised Schmidt squeaked out a win there 52 to 48%.
Well, she was able to run a lot of advertising, and the fact that she's a pharmacist, I think, belied the fact that she's one of the most reliably liberal members of the Kansas Senate and most likely to vote with the Democrats or the liberal side on issues. So I think this was a bit of a, this was good news for the self-described moderates and the newspaper editorialists that here in Kansas who like to endorse liberals.
And for United States Congress here in 4th District, the Wichita and surrounding area, we'll probably not talk a lot about this now because I want to have both of these candidates on the show. But James Thompson got about 2/3 of the votes against Laura Lombard. He will be the Democratic nominee. He was the Democratic nominee about a year and a half ago in the special election. Over on the Republican side, you know, the Ron M. Estes really didn't gain much traction as we expected, and it's going to be Rep. Ron Estes, the Ron Estes that we know who's been on this show several times, that will be the Republican.
It was kind of fun. One of the online services joked about how Ron Estes won and lost the same race Tuesday night.
Well, yeah, all sorts of, when that Ron M. Estes declared, there were a flurry of national stories, and then quite a bit this week too. But really, it's almost a sideshow, isn't it, Karl? And I think it's funny, but not funny in another way as well.
It was kind of sad.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a moment off for a commercial break. We'll be back again in just a moment. Well, welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks, your host, with Karl Peterjohn, your co-host. And in the Kansas 2nd District congressional race, the 2nd District is, Topeka is the largest city, but it's most of eastern Kansas except for the Kansas City metro area, Johnson County and Wyandotte counties. The Democrat there was unopposed or didn't have vigorous challenge. That's Paul Davis of Lawrence, who almost was governor 4 years ago, did a pretty good job against Sam Brownback. On the Republican side, it was a crowded field with some pretty well-known names. There were 3 sitting Kansas senators, former Speaker of the House, and then this guy named Steve Watkins, who'd never run for office before. It was pointed out that he may not have voted before in Kansas and had a spotty record. It was thought he auditioned for Democrats to see if he could run for this as a Democrat. He won. Spent a lot of money. There was $1.5 million in independent political action committee spending, mostly funded by his father. But he won, and he's going to face Paul Davis in November.
Yeah, they filled the mailboxes with folks. I saw firsthand a lot of the mailers that came in on Watkins' behalf, particularly from third parties. And it was a race where there were a host of conservative candidates, and they split up the standard conservative votes between those legislators.
Yeah, there were, the conservatives were at 23, 12, 16, and 12%. So, yeah, that's when you have a lot of candidates on a ballot that are similar to each other. That can very much happen. There's also a contest for the Democratic nomination for the United States House of Representatives in District 3. That's mostly Johnson and Wyandotte counties. Kevin Yoder is the incumbent. He's been there since 2010, I believe it is. But the Democratic primary was hotly contested, and a lady named Sharice Davids will be the nominee, narrowly defeating a guy named Brent Welder. And that's of some interest because Welder received a campaign visit not long ago from Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the new poster girl of the Democratic left.
Well, both these candidates, and there were several others who didn't run as well, were the leading vote getters in the Democrat primary in the 3rd District. But it's a sign of how far left the Democrats have moved, because it was basically a battle between two very, very far leftists who'd actually make Nancy Pelosi look somewhat like a moderate.
And that district before Yoder was represented by what we call a blue dog Democrat, Dennis Moore, who a blue dog Democrat is one who voted with conservatives on financial issues very often.
Well, it had been a while for that,
Yeah.
and it was closely contested because Johnson County has a reputation for being strongly Republican but strongly sympathetic to
So
what they call moderate.
District 3, who carried that in the presidential election?
Well, Hillary Clinton.
Narrowly.
Narrowly, yes.
So you would
but Wyandotte
expect this to
County,
be
that's in it, is the most reliably Democrat county in the state.
Yeah, maybe except for Douglas County where Lawrence is, but
Well, Wyandotte County's history goes further back than Douglas
Okay.
as a Democrat stronghold.
so that District 3 race between Yoder and Sharice Davids, that's likely to be competitive. District 2 with this Watkins against Paul Davis, competitive as well, I think.
I think those will remain on the national radar, at least for the short run. But I think by October, I think it's going to be real hard for the Democrats to put money into both those races because there, I think, will be stronger opportunities for them in other
In other
congressional
races.
districts, in other congressional districts around the country.
And down here in our District 4, where we have Ron Estes versus James Thompson, that's a repeat of a year and a half ago, and that was a fairly close race, so could be competitive again.
It could be. I really think that with the overall political climate, it's going to be really tough for Thompson to be able to get back to the 47% he had a year and a half ago.
You know, up in the 2nd District again, that would be Paul Davis versus the newcomer Steve Watkins. I think the Democrats were hoping that one of the rabid conservatives, they call him, like Steve Fitzgerald, just to make up a name, or Dennis Pyle had won, because I think they saw that they could defeat a far-right conservative. But here we've got this Watkins guy who doesn't have much of a record and who may have centrist tendencies. I think that's going to make that tougher for Paul Davis.
And the real challenge is opposition research, and with legislators who have public voting records, there's a lot of material to work with.
Exactly.
You take a person who's never run for public office before, it's very hard to be able to definitively pin them down in a way of saying, like you could with Representative Jones or Senator Smith. What about this vote on such and such a date on this issue or that issue?
And when you vote on big bills like the budget, where there's like 1,000 different line items on there, you can nitpick and find stuff. Oh yeah, he voted for this, and when really that, it's just a small part of a bigger bill. So maybe that's a topic for legislative reform. But Karl, let's take our halftime break here, and when we come back, we will take a look at the elephant in the room, which is the Kansas Republican nominating primary. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks and Karl Peterjohn, your hosts today. So, the Republican primary nomination for governor, very close. The two leading candidates we've known all along were current Governor Jeff Collier and current Secretary of State Chris Kobach. As of now, there is 151 votes separating them, with Chris Kobach in the lead, and that is just a minuscule number of votes. This was a real cliffhanger because Johnson County, our state's most populous county, didn't fully report their results until 8 o'clock Wednesday morning. So not much fun to be a candidate or even a supporter of a candidate with things like that. So what's going to happen in this? How are we going to decide if it's going to be Collier or Kobach who actually won this election?
Well, state law, the one thing I can guarantee you, and we're taping this Thursday morning, so there will be changes in these vote totals. That I can guarantee you, because all 105 counties have to certify to the Secretary of State and the state canvassing board, which there are 3 elected state officials, including the Secretary of State and governor. So I think both Governor Collier and Secretary Kobach will be involved. But each county has to certify their vote totals, and it's state law currently requires that ballots that were mailed in and postmarked Tuesday can be counted if they're received by the county clerk or the election commissioner. And of course, we've got some counties that have clerks administering the elections, and we've got the larger counties where we've got election commissioners by Friday. So until that happens, the canvass cannot occur, and the county commissioners actually serve as the canvassing board that will certify the local election results for their county.
You participated in canvasses both as a candidate running for office and then as a member of the Sedgwick County Commission,
For 8
which is the
years.
canvassing board here. So this happens usually about a week after the election or so. Happens at different times in different counties, I think, but
Yes.
usually about a week later. And what's done at that time, Carl? I mean, what are the problems that the canvass resolves?
Well, we'll have ballots come in where there's some question as to whether they should be counted or not. For instance, if they're postmarked after Tuesday, those ballots will not be counted. If the ballots are not properly signed, because you've got to sign your signature on a mail ballot on the outside. If they are not signed, those ballots don't end up being counted. Provisional ballots may occur. A person goes in and says, I want to vote, and they say, well, we don't have your name here, and they'll
Or
check.
you show up at the wrong precinct?
Well, you're at the wrong precinct, and you can have a situation where their votes will be cast for like statewide and county races if they're in precinct A and they should have
But if
voted
they
in
showed
precinct
up at
B.
the wrong county commission district, then their vote for county commissioner is not going to count.
Is not going to count, and all that has
That's
to
a
be sorted.
headache for the election commissioner, I think.
Well, it's a headache for everyone involved, and
Right.
it's unfortunate because the intent is to try and promote legal voting in Kansas by citizens. And we've tried to put some protection in place. Of course, this has been a big issue for Secretary Kobach, so that A, we have citizens voting, and B, we don't have people voting multiple times, and some of the problems that have existed in other places where I saw a story about in one state where in Georgia, I believe it was, they had 276 registered voters and they cast over 600 ballots.
Yeah, you hear about that from time to time. So with only 151 votes out of maybe 300 or so thousand cast for the Republican nominee for governor, every county is going to have to be very careful in their canvass.
Well, every county, I think, is. And having done this, and it's a public process, if people want to participate, they can contact the election commissioner's office, and it's normally held at here in Sedgwick County anyway, it would be at the historic courthouse where the election commissioner has an office.
But all that can vary in each county.
But that can vary, and if
yeah.
there's a huge crowd, for instance, I think they might move it to a larger room. But,
Right.
but the county commissioners, with their legal counsel, helping them saying state law says you must do this, you must do that. I think it's important that the viewers and citizens out there have confidence that the real decision makers in this are the county commissioners operating under their legal guidance and with recommendations and input from their county clerk or election commissioner. And it's really, I have no concerns at all in terms of having a situation where Chris Kobach is overseeing in effect an election where he's obviously deeply involved. And I was in that position myself as a candidate where I was canvassing in an election where I was on the ballot.
So the counties will canvass, they report the results to the Secretary of State's office, and then there's a state, I think you alluded to that, a group of people at the state level meet and accept all those county results, and that's when we can actually tabulate up and say, what are the final vote totals? And you know, there's a House election in Reno County where out of about 5,000 votes cast, one candidate leads by just one single vote.
And we've had a situation in Sedgwick County, and it wasn't unprecedented, especially for smaller offices, maybe a township office, where we'd have a tie vote, 6-6.
Yeah.
And literally we'd put names, and we have a top hat. Each county does it a little bit differently, but you can draw straws, or some places
And that
they
can
draw
happen for precinct
pick
committee
cards.
man too, and you might be saying, well, that means your vote really counts, but who is a precinct committee man anyway? It doesn't really matter that much. But Carl, let's
Well,
take
for
our,
township officials and other officials,
they have budget authority and stuff.
anyone who has
taxing.
taxing and budget authority,
Yeah.
that's significant.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's take our last commercial break for the day. We'll be back again in just a moment. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks and Karl Peterjohn, your hosts for today. At the state level, all 125 positions of the House of Representatives are up for election there. And there were some interesting results. For example, in District 28, which is in Johnson County, a challenger, Kelly Warren, defeated the incumbent, Joy Costin, 58 to 42%. Why is that significant? Well, Joy Costin was tied for number 149th on the Kansas Policy Institute Freedom Index amongst all legislators, the House and the Senate. So
149th out of 165.
Right, so pretty much down near the bottom. So this was a moderate tax-raising Republican who was defeated. There is a Democrat in that race, and I don't know how that goes as well. In the Leavenworth area, House of Representatives 42, there was a challenge to Jim Carlskent, who is again a moderate Republican. He ranked 136 out of all legislators, and he held on 53% to 47%. Now down here in South Central Kansas, last week at the Wichita Pachyderm, we had three challengers to incumbents appear and spoke to us. And none of their challengers appeared, the three incumbents, and all three of those won. Stephen Owens from district number 74, which is, I think, centered around Heston in that area.
It has Heston, I think, McPherson, and part of Harvey County. So
he defeated Don Schroeder 55 to 45%. Schroeder, I think, was in there
Schroeder
for
was long-term
quite a
incumbent.
while. And Schroeder was not all that bad. He was 53rd ranked on KFI, so, you know, kind of down the middle. So not good, but not terrible. And there's no other candidates in that election. So
that's, in effect, unless there's a last-minute write-in, which has occurred, by the way. But in all likelihood, Mr. Owens is going to be heading to Topeka next January.
In District 75, which is, I think, El Dorado and north of there, Will Carpenter, who had been in the House but was defeated by Mary Martha Good. Well, Carpenter won with 60% to 40%. No other candidates in that race in the general election. And in District 80, which is Ark City and Wellington and the rural areas in there, Anita Judd Jenkins was the incumbent. Again, she ranked 149th out of 165 on the Freedom Index. But Bill Riley, not O'Reilly, but just Riley, 58% of the vote he got. So he's in the House, representative too. Here on the east side of Wichita, Renee Erickson got 56% over 44% for Jeff Kennedy, a first-time candidate, but endorsed by the incumbent Roger Elliott, who ranked 149th on the Freedom Index.
Well, there seem to be a lot of people ranked at 149th.
Yeah. Well, there was a bunch that tied, for that. But really, probably the most shocking result down here was District number 93. So this is, I think, a little bit of southwest Wichita and towns south and west of there. John Whitmer's the incumbent, who was in 8th position on the KFI ranking, so that's very near the top. But he's not going to be going back to the House of Representatives. His opponent, J.C. Moore, got 51 to 49% of the vote, and that was really surprising.
That was a 52 vote margin, and that district includes Hayesville, or parts of Hayesville going west, to include also Cheney and rural western part of Sedgwick County.
So what did Whitmer do wrong, do you know?
That's a really good question, because John's been very active, at least within Republican circles, but I don't know how hard he'd been working his district, and it's often a key for those
incumbents. Well, judging by his Facebook feed, he posts pictures of him out in the field almost every evening, talking to voters.
Well, I don't have an answer on that. It's interesting. It goes to I think, a feeling of disquiet among voters in terms of wanting turnover and discomfort over incumbents, because we're talking about basically almost everyone in those lists are either incumbents being defeated or a few open seats where there's a change from where we had been.
Like
the big story,
the Renee Erickson,
the big story that we're looking at here, Bob, is regardless of who's going to Topeka in the Kansas House of Representatives in 2019, you're looking at the black-robed oligarchs in the Kansas Supreme Court continuing to dominate the political process. And since they really don't have any term limits of any sort, except they may age out, and none of them are really super close to aging out. Maybe if either Mr. Kobach or Mr. Collier are able to serve 2 full terms, they might get an appointment or 2 at the very end if everybody continues.
Yeah.
It looks like, because the key issues in our state, Bob, are being determined in the judiciary. They're really not, the legislature's, what color sirens are being put on emergency vehicles type legislation is much more frequent than school finance and the life issue concerning abortion.
Well, just to close up, I mean, the curious thing about the Whitmer race is, first of all, he was endorsed by the Wichita Eagle. So for conservatives, that's kind of, we view the Eagle editorial board as kind of liberals. For them to endorse John Whitmer, that raised some eyebrows, and I think he got a lot of ribbing. Whitmer did. Don't hold that against me. But then also, Whitmer is on TV and in the newspaper all the time. The panel shows like This Week in Kansas and now on KPTS. He's a frequent panelist and is oftentimes quoted in the newspaper, and very much a social conservative as well. Instead of allowing medical marijuana, he'd rather build more prisons, he said. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but that's his position. So anyway, we're a bit over time, so let's hurry and sign off. Thanks for watching us again this week on Wichita Liberty TV. For Bob Weeks and Karl Peterjohn, we'll see you next week.